Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Feeling ready to kick your sales into high gear? We're here to help. Check out our sales coaching and consulting services at predictablerevenue.com. Ruben, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on. And one thing we were talking about just before we got started here was talking about how to be free. And that's a really interesting question I want to set you up with. I want to add a bit of context. I'm going to assume the role of a new SDR in this, fresh out of college, and we're going to talk about how do I figure this out to be free. I think it's easy for me to, as a CEO, to sit here and go, oh yeah, all this makes sense because I've got the title, I've been doing this, I've been in sales for 20 years. So it's a whole lot easier for me to kind of sit here and accept these things. But I remember the fear of being new and being on the phone and feeling like I had to put on my phone voice and feeling like I had to put on all these layers around me as like protection. And so with that being said, I'd love for you to talk to us about how, as salespeople, as SDRs, as people that are trying to attract customers, trying to create real connections and conversations, talk to me about how we can be free.
Well, there's this idea that the ultimate path to connecting with people in sales is through creativity and personalization. And this just means, how can we gather their attention? How can we capture their interest? Maybe that's creativity. And then how can we convey information so that they feel like what we're telling to them is done in a personalized way? Our product or service is applied and it's relevant for them. And that's why they potentially want to talk to us and hopefully buy from us. So creativity and personalization, those are the keys to being amazing in sales. Now, it's really hard to do that when you start to talk about scale and you start to talk about bureaucracy, you start to talk about dogma, you start to talk about scripts, templates. On this spectrum that we look at, on the left side, it's I can do whatever I want. I'm a solopreneur. I can take risks. I can do interesting things and be a little bit silly. And then on the opposite side, you're an SDR. You're a new SDR that's working for a large organization, and there's rules and regulations and a boss and ideas of what's right and what's not right. And typically what happens, at least in a good organization, is that there's structure, there's a framework. Welcome. You're a new SDR on the team. Welcome. Here is your pack, and that pack contains how to say it, what to say, when to say it, why to say it, where to say it. It's got everything, right? So now the challenge becomes, how do we become creative and personalized within a structure, within the dogma, within the constraints and the confines of whatever situation we find ourselves in? And that ultimately is the hardest thing to do. But once we can find that, which is, in my opinion, being free, is when we ultimately will get the promotion, we'll close the deal, we'll laterally jump, we'll internally jump. However you define success, that will occur. And the idea here of being free is saying, I am not afraid to live within the constraints, not break the rules, but still make it my own, make it creative and make it personalized.
Before we jump into how can we be free, I feel like as a new SDR within the confines, there's also the fear, right? It's not just the external kind of layers that get added in of you got to say this and you have to do this and you got to explain the product this way. Those are the kind of external layers that you got to get through. But I think there's those internal layers of like, I'm a new SDR. I've got to follow the book. I've got to be like this. There's all these kind of assumptions and biases, at least I had, about when I was on the phone and the things I felt like I could and could not say. Like, I've always been a fairly silly person, but it took me a long time to build that into my cold calling a little bit. And not that I'm getting on the phone and telling knock jokes, but I would love it if that worked. That would be incredible. It probably doesn't, but I hope somebody tests it out. So how do we get through those kind of internal layers? Maybe we start there and then we get into, how do we create it? Because I think to your point, you got to get through all of those layers.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is that understanding that the reason why we have the layers the way that they exist is because someone has tested this. Someone has tried that script out. They've picked up the phone. They've sent the email. They've sent the LinkedIn message, and some response came to them. And then as a result of that, there's some definition of success. Now, if we're a creative person that wants to go and try to break that, change it, do something different, we can't just start to do that because we will be a rebel and we will break the rules. And it doesn't matter if we're the smartest guy in the room, because ultimately no one's going to want to work with us because we just can't follow the rules. And that's not where we want to be. So I think the key is really diving deep into whatever it is that you're doing and truly making it your own. If someone reads a script in a really monotone way without any personality, and they're not really bringing, frankly, any of their personality to the table, it's probably not going to work. The person on the other side is going to sense that this person is not in it. They're not present. They're not excited. They're not passionate about this. So the second that we take a mediocre script and add our passion, our personalization, our persona, sometimes our persistence, all of a sudden, the world opens up to us. So I think the first thing is about really truly making it your own and not being disgruntled about having to use someone else's work, because it's sort of sparing you the experimentation time, because chances are it's there because it has worked at some point.
So how do we get to a place where we're comfortable doing that?
I think it's repetition. I think that there is some beauty that happens when you get to a point where you've repeated something so many times that every time for the first 1,000 times, you've noticed some incremental improvement. And by definition, it's actually not repetition, because every time it's a little bit different and hopefully a little bit better. At least on an average, it's better. It doesn't need to be better every single time. There's ups and downs. But overall, you will be improving. The other day I was at this Chinese restaurant, Chin Chin's, and the waiter came to the table and, he asked us, he says, "So what would you guys like to order?" And then we're just looking at the menu. We hadn't even looked at the menu yet. So, that's an old one. The waiter comes to the table and you finally pick up the menu saying, "I'm ready to order." So we start to look at the order, and within a second, he knew that we were not ready to order. And what he said was, you guys take some time. I'll come back. And the way he said it, it was as if he had done that 1,000 times, because he probably has. Said, "You guys take your time. I'll come right back." And the way I was laughing about this with my wife, because the way that he said it, you could tell he was experienced with that. He knew that his time is valuable, that we were not remotely close to being ready to order from the menu. So he was, making us feel good, being actually compassionate, empathetic. And I think that's just an example of a script that he's repeated 1,000 times, where he found the nuance in it. And I felt that, and I connected to that, and I smiled, and I said, "Great, we'll see you in a couple of minutes." And then of course we were prepared afterwards once he arrived. But I think the point here is, repetition brings the beauty in it. And that's what essentially is going to get us to the point where we can actually start to enjoy it. The final comment that I'll make here is that if we are not enjoying what we are doing, people will smell it from 1,000,000 miles away. It smells like death. If you've ever smelt that death plant, that comes like once, it like blooms like once a year or something, and it's putrid. It's just terrible smelling. At Huntington Park, we go and we see it because it's so interesting. You can smell it a mile away. And that is the same thing in sales. If you are an SDR, if you are a VP of sales, if you are a CEO, does not matter. A podcaster, does not matter who you are. If you are not feeling passionate, if you are not interested in what you're doing, and you're not frankly happy, people will smell it from 1,000,000 miles away.
And so I'd love to talk a little bit about how do we get onto this path of I guess solidifying, that feeling of being able to be yourself in the sales and prospecting, kind of regardless of what industry you're in.
I somehow was reminded of Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream company that was acquired for just an insane amount of money. And now it's a franchise. I recently went to one. And, I was doing a little bit of research on the founders, Ben and Jerry. And, their process building up the company was a sort of true organic sort of grassroots type founding. And, they were making ice cream. They were mixing the milk and the sugar, and they were doing the process, and they did it so many times that they became masters at it. And what they realized was that, yes, people want ice cream, but people also want clever titles, clever ingredients, stories behind them, interesting colors. And I think for the SDR, I think that this is sort of my public service announcement, but if you feel like you are in a situation where you're better than it, because I know this because I felt like this so much of my life. I am better than the situation that I am in. I should not have this job. I should have that guy's job. I should not have this salary. I should have that person's salary. You're missing something. You're missing the essence of what Ben and Jerry went through in their founding story, which is to figure out the perfect way to make ice cream. And they did not make a lot of money. They were grossly underpaid for years and years and years until they realized that they were sitting on something really big. And then they, of course, made some great choices, got very lucky, super creative. And then, here we are with Ben and Jerry's. So I think the takeaway that I'm trying to say here is that if you find your joy in the process, if you make it your own, if you truly be present in what you're doing, then you are going to get where you want to be. You're going to get that job. You're going to get that salary. You're going to get that deal. You're going to get that title. It's all going to come to you, but you can't sit there in your chair disgruntled saying, I'm too good for this, because that's just going to end up worse.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how do I figure out if I'm a new SDR, a new AE, how do I figure out, what it is that I'm struggling with, that's getting in my way to, getting to this promised land of being free?
Well, I think a lot of it really comes down to listening. I think that listening is probably one of the most underutilized. Next to writing, listening is one of the most underutilized skills and activities, frankly, in sales. And I think the reason why this is the case is because salespeople are, number one, we are mostly extroverts in nature. Some of us are hybrid introverts, extroverts, and there are some that are introverts pretending to be extroverts. That's kind of me most of the time. But the point here, though, is that when you are listening, you are actually able to show the person that you're connecting to them. And by listening, you're learning. Because if we keep repeating our same sales pitch, imagine an SDR that has a job where they just go in and they just start saying, here's our features. And they repeat that over and over and over again. Okay. So let's just diagnose that for 1 second here. Okay. Number one, that's boring as heck. Okay. No one wants to go and repeat the same sales pitch over and over and over again. Number two is you're not learning, you're not listening, you're not seeing what the target client's problems truly are so that you can address them. Number three is you're not showing, empathy or compassion or the fact that I want to personalize my pitch, be creative so that I can help you solve your problems, And not to mention, it's not good for your mental health. There's a whole another long list that I can add to the problem of just repeating your sales pitch over and over as opposed to listening. But the most important thing is that you're evolving as a person. You're saying, how do I become happy with the things that I'm unhappy about? How do I accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish? How do I get better at my weaknesses? How do I improve my own strengths? So I think truly being present and listening, I think, is really where the most growth can take place. Socrates and actually Confucius said it best. They said, the wise man is quiet, the dumb man, the fool, talks a lot.
What are your thoughts on how do we get to that, understanding that point of relevance? Because not everybody's just going to sit there and tell you, these are the things that are most relevant, right? Sometimes you got to dig.
Yeah. Well, someone once told me something, and I'll never forget this because I always try to do it. So I just like most people, I'm a visual learner and I'm a visual communicator, which is why we love video and why we built what we build at Dub. And if you can draw your business, if you can draw your customer's business from A to Z, the whole thing, you have a black belt. You truly understand the whole ecosystem of what it looks like from their perspective and also what your perspective is. And then the key is, of course, finding that alignment between your ecosystem and their ecosystem. And that's where the sale and the revenue and, relationship takes place. But, most people, if you were to ask them, can you draw your business? Most of the people cannot. They can draw their department or their role, but they can't draw their entire business. So if you're in sales and you can't draw your entire business, you don't know what it's going to look like when the client gets onboarded or when the client is served as an account or when the client is having issues, problems, customer service issues, or when the client wants to churn or when the client wants to do the opposite, which is refer someone. You don't have clarity of what that looks like. And then the same thing applies to their business. what truly are you selling? Why are you selling it? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Like, what is it? If I have a widget here, if this is the widget that I'm selling, this little porcelain house, if I don't understand why my customer wants this and what problem it's truly solving, how can I ultimately sell this? And how can I enjoy selling this? And how can I go to bed at night knowing that when I sell this widget to someone, it completely changes their world and they make money, they save money, they get happy, whatever the case may be, it brings them that satisfaction. So how important is it that we can A, draw our business, and B, draw their business, the customers? And the way, of course, this all happens is through listening. And listening is not just my ears are open when someone else is talking. It's listening to podcasts like yours. It's reading books. It's going onto YouTube and doing the 6-hour marathon on YouTube, which everyone should do, at least once a quarter, where you want to learn how to do something and you go spend 6 hours on YouTube and you watch every video ever made on that topic. And you come out the other end after the weekend, you're like, wow, I actually know how to do that now. I'm not bad at that. I went through the process. That's listening. So draw your business and draw their business. And then all of a sudden you will have a much better perspective. And then as a junior marketing associate, maybe one day you can have that CEO job. Maybe it's your own company, or maybe it's a lateral jump, or maybe, you grow within your own organization. It is all possible, but you must have perspective.
Totally. First step is automating your job with a macro that you copy and pasted from the internet. And then that's how you free up your time so you can start making cold calls for the sales guy across the hall.
Yeah, exactly. Delegating 80% of your work is 100% awesome. I think I heard that on a Dan Martell YouTube video. So
you tell me about, your process and some of the things. I know you've had an interesting journey there. Can you maybe shed some light on how and where people might want to poke around for stuff like that?
So I think that what I love about this topic, which is like self-realization, is that we're all students of this. We're all on this journey. I'm learning things about myself every single day. I learn mostly from my amygdala hijacks. When my amygdala is hijacked, that's when I learn about what I'm afraid of, whether it's, safety of my kids, or whether it's growth for the business, or whether it's losing a client. There's defensiveness, there's humor, there's jokes, there's, anger, there's the clench of the fists, there's some, reaction. And that's basically your mind feeling something, right? And a lot of the times we try to shake it off, or we try to laugh it off, or just pretend like it was nothing. But really, ultimately, those are our fears, right? And if we don't address those fears in our conscious state, we are going to address those in our subconscious state when we're dreaming. And we're going to have a dream where there's a fiery dragon and we're getting pushed off of a cliff, and there's only one way to go. And that is probably a terrible job or a recession, or whatever it is, some metaphor, right? The fiery dragon is a metaphor for whatever you're truly, most worried about in your life. And I think, this idea of self-realization, self-awareness, I think that comes from pushing yourself and actually being uncomfortable, moving yourself out of the complacency. Most people would rather be in a coffin than the person giving the eulogy. That is a known fact. Public speaking is a terrifying thing for most people. In fact, it was for me, and I still feel it. I get the heebie-jeebies before I go on a stage, and I have to breathe, and I have to go through the process. And but it feels good once I overcome it, and I'm able to communicate and share a story. And I think that putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, I think is really where that starts, because that's where we start to expand ourselves. If you're a guitarist, jump on a piano. If you have an acoustic guitar, grab an electric guitar. Continue to expand that horizon, because then you get that larger sort of perspective of things, and then you figure out what your strengths and your weaknesses are. Some people have an innate abilities to do things better than others. It's sort of just a random thing, nature, nurture. Who knows what it is? It's not really relevant, And other people have to work on things. So as you start to sort of experiment and try things and become self-aware and go to that conference, get on that stage, get on that podcast, start something, start your YouTube channel, write that song, write your book, put the ink to the paper in whatever way it means to you. That is going to allow you to become more self-aware. And frankly, it's going to build personality. I mean, this is what Ernest Hemingway, would always write about, which is the idea of a hero going on a journey. and that hero going on an arc. And we start in this current place, and then we get some catalyst, we meet someone educates us, something happens to us, we get some sort of a fall, and then all of a sudden we become realized, we find the way, we find the direction, we feel compassion, someone guides us there, or frankly, we guide ourselves there, and then we get to a different state, a post state. That's the beauty of the story arc. And we're all a story arc within a story arc within a story arc. If you look at our progress, hopefully this upward trajectory, that just looks like a sawtooth,
Percent. I wanted to land the episode. We talked in the pre-interview about sort of creating a framework for success, and how do we make this repeatable and scalable? I know a big part of that's repetition. I'm curious, your thoughts on some of the things we've talked about, from kind of discovering how to be your, true, honest, authentic self, to like getting to that place to be radically honest, to finding your strengths and opportunities. What are your thoughts on how do we build this all into a framework for success?
Well, I think that, just to circle back to fear and to understanding fear, I think that it's as sales and marketing professionals, I think it's really important to understand this simple truth. And this is conjecture. This is my opinion. You don't have to agree with this, but this is simply my opinion. So, ultimately, all cold sales messages are going to get blocked, right? Emails already get put into a promo or a spam folder, okay? It's really hard to get your emails at scale in campaigns delivered to someone's inbox right at the top where, it's all peachy and perfect and all the images appear. It's really hard to do that. It's nearly impossible, okay? Most of the time it goes into another folder, and then you have to display images, and all sorts of stuff is required just to protect consumers. Google and Earthlink and AOL and Mac Mail and Outlook, Microsoft, all these companies are trying to figure out how to protect our privacy and how to protect inundation by data, noise overload. And a lot of that is emails. LinkedIn messages. What do we do with them? Most of them we ignore, right? How many of your LinkedIn messages have you responded to? I don't know. Is it 10%, 5%?
Yeah, I couldn't even guess. I get so many, and they're all so clearly automation at this stage.
Right. Yeah. Text messages. Text messages is still open, actually. There's not, I think on Android devices, there is some sort of a promo folder on some version of Android, but on iPhone, if you send someone an SMS, it's just going to go into the same folder, And I know this because, at Dub, we're actually building this two-way SMS feature, and we're getting ready to launch it. And it's amazing because you can broadcast an SMS message to 10,000 people, and it goes right in their inbox. So we have to make sure that people are being very responsible with this technology. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, leaning into this fear that ultimately all our messages are going to get blocked as sales professionals, it inspires us to figure out how we can become more scalable and more repeatable, how we can overcome the idea of eventually that we are going to be in a blocked environment. And I think the solution is actually to call in exactly what you do, which is to start a podcast, to, wire up your social channels, to get your personality out there, to understand this simple fact that we're building personas, we're building these characters. I am a persona, I'm a character. You can go to YouTube and you can type my name, or you can type Rev Show and you can find me, and that's my thing. And I've effectively cloned myself. So I can kick back at home and be comfortable, and then you can go watch, the content that I've created, or your amazing podcasts. Just, hopefully just like this one, people can go consume that content. In fact, millions of people can consume that. So for the SDR listening out there, get yourself ready to become a creator if you're not one already. Pick up your phone. It's a production studio. It's right in your pocket. You can do anything you want on it. Video, audio. It's the sky is the limit. It's just about starting and beginning, because ultimately your messages will get blocked and people will have to find you on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and, Twitter and whatever else, whatever the new thing is, in the future. So just keep that in mind, create, and that ultimately is what's going to connect and finally convert.